There is a level of protection that exists beyond what the eyes can see and beyond what the mind can fully measure. It is not built from physical strength, nor is it dependent on circumstances remaining favorable. It is deeper than that, steady, constant, and unshaken by what happens externally. Yet despite its power, many live without fully experiencing it, not because it does not exist, but because it has not been activated. Life often brings moments of pressure that cannot always be explained. Sudden fear without clear reason, unusual heaviness that seems to come and go, resistance that appears without warning, situations that feel larger than expected, as if something unseen is influencing what is happening on the surface. These experiences are not always understood, but they are felt. And in response, many try to protect themselves in different ways, through effort, through caution, through constant awareness of what could go wrong. But even with all of that, there is still a sense that something is missing, something deeper, something stronger, something that does not rely on constant struggle to maintain safety. This is where the concept of spiritual protection becomes essential. Not as an idea, not as a theory, but as a reality that can be engaged. A covering that is not fragile, not temporary, and not dependent on human strength alone. A protection that does not weaken under pressure, does not break under attack, and does not fail when circumstances become difficult. But here is the critical truth. This protection is not automatic. It exists, but it must be activated. This is where many misunderstand. There is an assumption that awareness is enough, that simply knowing about protection means it is already functioning. That hearing about it, reading about it, or acknowledging it mentally is the same as living within it. But awareness without activation leaves a gap. And in that gap, vulnerability remains. Because what is not activated cannot defend. This is why some continue to experience instability, even while knowing that protection is available, not because the protection is weak, but because it has not been engaged in a consistent and intentional way. It remains present, but inactive, like a shield that exists but has not been lifted. And the shield that is not lifted cannot block anything. The deeper truth is that this level of protection was never meant to be distant or difficult to access. It was designed to be lived in, to be established as a constant reality, not something temporary or occasional. It is not meant to be used only in moments of fear. It is meant to be a daily position that creates stability before fear even appears. This is what makes it powerful. Because when protection is activated before pressure comes, it does not need to be built under stress. It is already established, already in place, already functioning. And because of that, what comes against it does not find an opening. But without activation, the opposite happens. Protection is only sought after pressure arrives. It is only considered when fear is already present. It is only attempted when something feels wrong. And by that point, there is already a sense of instability that makes it harder to respond with clarity. This is why activation matters. It shifts protection from reaction to position. It removes the need to constantly defend from a place of urgency and replaces it with a steady covering that exists continuously. It turns something that feels temporary into something that becomes permanent. And most importantly, it creates a level of confidence that is not shaken by what is happening externally. Because when protection is truly activated, it is not based on feeling. It is based on alignment. It is based on alignment. This means that even when emotions fluctuate, the covering remains. Even when situations change, the protection does not weaken. Even when challenges appear, they do not have the same impact because they are no longer reaching the same level. They are being stopped. This is the shield that many know about, but few truly activate. Not because it is complicated, but because it requires intentional engagement. And once it is activated, everything begins to change, not always visibly at first, but internally, where stability replaces fear and confidence replaces uncertainty. Because the greatest protection is not the one that is known. It is the one that is consistently activated. It is possible to know something deeply, to hear it repeatedly, to even believe it, and still not experience its full effect. This is one of the most overlooked realities when it comes to spiritual protection. Knowledge exists, awareness is present, yet the results do not match what is known. And this creates confusion, because if the truth is understood, why does vulnerability still exist? The answer lies in the difference between knowing and activating. Knowing is passive. It exists in thought, in memory, in awareness. It acknowledges what is available, but it does not necessarily engage with it. Activation, on the other hand, is intentional. It requires movement, positioning, and consistency. It takes what is known and brings it into function. And this is where many remain stuck. There is an assumption that understanding automatically produces results. That once something is known, it will naturally begin to work. But spiritual principles do not operate passively. They respond to alignment. They require engagement. And without that engagement, even the most powerful truths remain inactive. This creates a gap between what is believed and what is experienced, a gap between what is available and what is functioning. And in that gap, instability can still exist. Not because the protection is weak, but because it has not been consistently activated. This is why many feel exposed, even while knowing that protection is promised. Because awareness without alignment leaves the door open. There is also another layer to this consistency. Activation is not a one-time action. It is not something that is done once and then left alone. It is something that must be maintained, reinforced, and lived out continuously. Just as strength is built through repeated effort, spiritual protection is strengthened through repeated alignment. But inconsistency weakens that process. Moments of clarity followed by long periods of neglect create instability. There may be times where alignment is strong, where awareness is active, where everything feels secure. But when that consistency fades, so does the strength of the position. And over time, this creates a pattern of temporary stability followed by vulnerability. This is why protection can feel inconsistent, not because it changes, but because engagement changes. There are also distractions that pull attention away from alignment. Daily pressures, responsibilities, thoughts, and emotions can shift focus away from maintaining position. And when focus is lost, activation becomes weaker, not instantly, but gradually. It does not disappear all at once. It fades. And because it fades slowly, it is often not recognized until pressure increases again, until something feels off, until fear begins to rise. And then attention returns to protection, but now from a place of reaction instead of position. This reactive approach is what keeps many from experiencing full stability. Because protection was never meant to be activated only during pressure. It was meant to be a constant state, a position that is maintained daily, not something that is only remembered when something feels wrong. And when this is not understood, the cycle continues. Awareness neglect, pressure, reaction without ever reaching a place of steady alignment. Another reason many remain unprotected is the misunderstanding of what activation actually requires. It is not just about words. It is not just about words. It is not just about repeating something. It is about position. Because words without alignment do not carry weight. They may sound correct, but if they are not backed by consistent positioning, they do not create lasting impact. This is why repetition alone does not guarantee protection. It must be connected to alignment. Alignment is what gives words their power. It is what makes activation real. It is what turns something from an idea into a functioning reality. And without it, everything remains at the level of awareness instead of experience. This realization is important because it shifts responsibility. It removes the assumption that protection is not working and replaces it with the understanding that activation must be consistent. It redirects focus away from questioning the truth and towards strengthening alignment with it. And this is where change begins. When awareness moves into action, when knowledge becomes consistent practice, when understanding is no longer passive but active and intentional. This is the point where the gap begins to close, where what is known finally begins to match what is experienced, because protection has always been available, but it only becomes effective when it is fully activated and consistently maintained. Before protection can become a reality, there must first be position. This is the foundation that is often overlooked. The understanding that covering does not begin with words, actions, or reactions, but with where one is positioned consistently. Without this foundation, everything else becomes temporary, unstable, and easily shaken. Position determines experience. It shapes what is accessed, what is sustained, and what is able to remain steady even when external conditions change. In the context of spiritual protection, this position is not physical. It is internal alignment. It is the state of remaining connected, anchored, and consistently aware of where stability truly comes from. This is not a momentary action. It is a continuous posture. Many approach protection as something that can be activated instantly during pressure, a response to fear, a reaction to uncertainty. But protection was never designed to function as a last-minute response. It was meant to be established long before pressure arrives, because what is not established beforehand becomes difficult to sustain during pressure. This is why position must come first. It is the starting point of everything that follows. Without it, declarations lose their strength. Without it, consistency becomes difficult. Without it, stability cannot be maintained. But when position is established, everything else begins to align naturally. Position is about remaining, not briefly, not occasionally, but consistently. It is the choice to stay anchored even when distractions arise, to remain aligned even when emotions fluctuate, to hold steady even when circumstances become uncertain. This consistency is what transforms protection from something temporary into something lasting. And this is where many struggle, not because they do not understand the importance of protection, but because maintaining position requires discipline. It requires intentional focus. It requires the willingness to remain aligned even when nothing seems to be happening, because position is often built in silence. There are no immediate signs, no dramatic changes at first. It is a quiet process, one that develops internally before it becomes visible externally. And because of this, it is easy to underestimate its importance or to abandon it too soon. But what is built in silence becomes strong in pressure. This is why position must be consistent. It is not something that can be turned on and off without consequence. It must become a way of living, not a temporary action, a steady alignment that remains regardless of what is happening externally. When position is maintained, protection becomes natural. It does not require constant effort to activate because it is already active. It does not depend on emotional state because it is rooted in alignment, not feeling. It does not weaken under pressure because it was established before the pressure arrived. This is the strength of position. It creates stability that cannot be easily shaken. It also simplifies everything. Instead of constantly trying to respond to every challenge, there is a steady awareness that protection is already in place. Instead of reacting to fear, there is confidence that fear does not have the same access anymore. Instead of feeling exposed, there is a sense of covering that remains constant. This does not mean challenges disappear, but it means they no longer penetrate, because position determines access. What is aligned correctly restricts what can reach it. What is anchored consistently becomes difficult to disrupt. And what is maintained daily becomes resistant to sudden pressure. This is the foundation of true protection. Not occasional effort, but consistent position. Not reaction, but preparation. Not temporary alignment, but continuous connection. And once this foundation is fully understood and maintained, everything else begins to build on it naturally. Words gain power. Consistency becomes easier. Confidence grows stronger. And protection shifts from something that is hoped for into something that is lived. Because before there can be a shield, there must first be position. And when position is established, the shield becomes unshakable. Once position is established, expression begins to matter in a different way. Words are no longer empty or routine. They become carriers of alignment. They reflect what has already been built internally. They reinforce what has already been established through consistent positioning. And when this alignment and expression come together, something powerful begins to form. Because words, when aligned, are not just sounds. They are force. Many underestimate this because they have become used to speaking without awareness of weight. Words are often repeated without intention, declared without clarity, spoken out of habit rather than understanding. And when words are used this way, they lose their impact. They become noise instead of direction. But when words are aligned with position, everything changes. They begin to carry authority, not because they are louder, not because they are longer, but because they are rooted in clarity. There is no contradiction between what is being spoken and what is being lived. There is no hesitation behind the declaration. There is no uncertainty weakening the expression. And that is what gives words their strength. Speaking the shield into reality is not about repeating phrases endlessly. It is about reinforcing alignment with intentional declaration. It is about confirming what has already been established internally. It is about maintaining clarity through consistent expressi. When this happens, words begin to shape the environment, not in a visible, immediate way at first, but in a foundational way. They begin to establish boundaries. They begin to reinforce protection. They begin to strengthen the position that has already been built. And over time, this creates a shield that is not easily broken, because it is not built on words alone. It is built on alignment expressed through words. This distinction is critical. Words without alignment are unstable. They may sound correct, but they lack foundation. They can be repeated many times, But without position, they do not create lasting impact. But words with alignment are different. They carry consistency, clarity, and authority. They do not need to be forced. They do not need to be exaggerated. They simply need to be true. And truth, when consistently declared from alignment, becomes powerful. This is how the shield begins to form more visibly, not as something imagined, but as something reinforced daily. Every aligned word adds strength. Every clear declaration builds consistency. Every intentional expression deepens the position that has already been established. Over time, this creates a structure, a shield that is not dependent on emotion, a covering that is not affected by temporary doubts, a protection that remains steady because it has been built layer by layer through consistent alignment and expression. This is why speaking must be intentional, not rushed, not careless, not driven by fear, but clear, steady, and aligned. Because words spoken in fear weaken position. Words spoken in doubt create inconsistency. Words spoken without awareness dilute alignment. But words spoken with clarity strengthen everything that has been built. This requires discipline. A discipline to pause before speaking, to ensure that what is being said reflects alignment, not confusion. To avoid reinforcing fear through careless expression, and to consistently declare what strengthens position instead of weakening it. This is not about perfection. It is about awareness. The more aware words become, the more aligned they become. And the more aligned they become, the more powerful they are in reinforcing the shield. And as this continues, something becomes noticeable. There is less instability, less reaction to external pressure, less vulnerability to sudden fear. Because the shield is no longer something that is being attempted. It is something that has been established through position, through consistency, and through words that carry alignment. This is how the shield becomes real, not through effort alone, but through alignment expressed consistently until it becomes unshakable. A shield is not formed in a single moment. It is not created through one action, one declaration, or one day of alignment. It is built over time, layer by layer, decision by decision, moment by moment. And the force that holds all of this together is consistency. Consistency is what turns understanding into reality. Without it, even the strongest principles remain unstable. There may be moments of clarity, moments of alignment, moments where everything feels strong and secure. But if those moments are not sustained, they begin to fade. And when they fade, the strength that was built begins to weaken. This is why many experience temporary stability instead of lasting protection. Not because the foundation is wrong, but because it is not being reinforced consistently. Consistency strengthens position. It deepens alignment. It stabilizes awareness. It builds a rhythm that does not depend on emotion or circumstance. And over time, it transforms what once required effort into something that becomes natural. But inconsistency interrupts this process. It creates gaps where alignment is strong, one moment, and weak the next. Gaps where awareness is present one day and absent the next. Gaps where protection feels secure at times but uncertain at others. And in those gaps, vulnerability begins to appear, not instantly but gradually, because what is not maintained cannot remain strong. This is the nature of building anything that lasts. Strength comes from repetition, but not empty repetition. It comes from consistent alignment applied over time. Each moment of alignment adds another layer. Each intentional action reinforces the structure. Each day of consistency strengthens the shield. And as these layers build, something begins to change. The effort decreases, but the strength increases. What once required conscious focus begins to happen naturally. Alignment becomes easier to maintain. Awareness becomes more constant. The need to try reduces because the pattern has already been established through repetition. This is where protection becomes stable. Not because challenges disappear, but because the foundation has been reinforced enough to withstand them. The shield is no longer fragile or dependent on perfect conditions. It is strong, steady, and resistant. Consistency also builds confidence, not emotional confidence that fluctuates, but steady confidence that comes from knowing that alignment has been maintained. There is less uncertainty, less hesitation, less reaction to external pressure, because internally everything has been reinforced enough to remain stable. This is the power of daily alignment. Small, consistent actions that seem simple in the moment but create significant impact over time. It is not about doing something extraordinary once it is about doing the right thing repeatedly until it becomes part of how everything is approached, and this requires discipline. Not harsh discipline, but intentional commitment, a decision to remain aligned even when it feels unnecessary. A willingness to stay consistent even when nothing seems to be changing. A focus on maintaining position regardless of external circumstances. Because consistency is not proven when it is easy, it is proven when it is maintained, even without visible results. This is where many stop too soon. They begin building, but they do not continue long enough to see the full strength develop. They align for a time, but then return to inconsistency when results are not immediate. And because of that, the shield never reaches its full potential. But those who remain consistent experience something different. Over time, the shield becomes unshakable. Not because it was built quickly, but because it was built steadily. Not because it was forced, but because it was reinforced continuously. Not because it depended on perfect conditions, but because it was maintained regardless of conditions. This is what makes it powerful. A protection that does not fluctuate. A covering that does not weaken. A shield that does not break under pressure. And all of it is the result of one principle applied consistently: alignment, maintained daily until it becomes permanent. Because in the end, it is not intensity that builds strength. It is consistency that makes it last. There comes a point where consistency, alignment, and intentional expression begin to produce something undeniable, a level of stability that does not feel forced, a sense of covering that does not need to be questioned, and a confidence that remains steady regardless of what is happening externally. This is the stage where the shield is no longer being built. It is fully activated. At this level, the internal environment has changed completely. Fear no longer has the same access it once had. It may attempt to appear, but it does not take root. It does not grow. It does not control, because the space it once occupied has been replaced by something stronger, alignment that has been reinforced over time. This is not the absence of challenges. It is the absence of vulnerability. To those challenges, pressure may still exist, but it no longer carries the same weight. Situations may still arise, but they do not create the same level of instability. External conditions may still shift, but internally there is steadiness that remains untouched. This is the evidence of a fully activated shield. It is not always visible externally at first, but it is deeply felt internally. There is a quiet assurance, a knowing that does not need constant validation, a confidence that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that is not easily disrupted. And this changes everything, because once the internal environment is stable, external influence becomes limited. What once caused anxiety now loses its effect. What once created fear now feels manageable. What once seemed overwhelming now appears smaller, not because it has changed, but because the position has changed. This is the power of established protection. It does not remove reality, it redefines how reality is experienced. There is also a noticeable shift in reaction. Where there was once urgency, there is now calm. Where there was once panic, there is now clarity. Where there was once confusion, there is now direction. This is not something that is forced. It is the natural result of alignment that has been consistently maintained. The shield begins to function automatically. It does not need to be activated in moments of crisis because it is already active. It does not need to be built under pressure because it was built before pressure arrived. It does not weaken when tested because it has already been strengthened over time. This is what makes it unshakable, because it is not dependent on momentary effort. It is sustained by consistent alignment that has become a permanent position. There is also a deeper level of confidence that begins to develop, not based on what is seen, but based on what is known internally. A confidence that remains steady, even when external confirmation is not immediate. A confidence that does not need to prove itself because it is rooted in understanding. This confidence creates peace, not temporary peace, but lasting peace. The kind that remains even when situations are unclear. The kind that holds steady even when outcomes are still unfolding. The kind that does not fluctuate with circumstances because it is anchored in something deeper. And in this state, something important becomes clear. The shield is not just protection, it is positioning. It is a state of being where access is controlled. Where what tries to come in is limited. Where what once penetrated no longer reaches the same level. This is not because everything has stopped, it is because the barrier has been established. And that barrier is strong, not fragile, not temporary, not easily broken, because it was built through alignment, reinforced through consistency, and activated through intentional expression over time. This is what it means for the shield to be fully activated. A place where stability replaces fear, where confidence replaces uncertainty, where protection is no longer something that is hoped for, but something that is lived every day. And once this level is reached, everything begins to feel different, not because life has become easier, but because the position has become stronger than anything that comes against it. Now everything comes down to one decision, whether this truth will remain something understood or become something lived every single day. Because protection, no matter how powerful, only works when it is consistently activated and maintained. This is not a one-time action. It is a daily commitment, a conscious decision to remain aligned, to stay positioned, and to reinforce what has already been built. Without this consistency, even the strongest foundation can begin to weaken over time. But with it, the shield becomes stronger, more stable, and completely unshakable. So the call is clear. Do not leave this at the level of awareness. Do not allow it to remain something that is only remembered in moments of pressure. Do not wait until fear appears to begin building what should have already been established, because reaction is always weaker than preparation. Instead, activate the shield daily. Make it part of how every day begins. Not as a routine without meaning, but as intentional alignment. A moment to reconnect, to reinforce position, and to ensure that this routine is not only present, but active. This requires focus, not distracted effort, not rushed words, not careless repetition, but clear, intentional engagement. Every day becomes an opportunity to strengthen the shield. Every moment becomes a chance to maintain alignment. And over time, this builds a covering that does not break under pressure. There will be moments where it feels unnecessary. Moments where everything seems calm, where no pressure is visible, where no immediate need for protection is felt. But those are the moments where consistency matters most, because what is built in calm seasons is what stands strong in difficult ones. Do not neglect those moments. Do not allow comfort to replace consistency, because the strength of the shield is not determined in moments of crisis. It is determined in moments of discipline. Stay intentional. Stay aware of position. Stay consistent in alignment. This is how the shield remains active without interruption. There will also be moments of challenge, moments where pressure increases, where distractions try to pull attention away, where old patterns attempt to return. But those moments are not a signal to stop. They are a signal to remain even more grounded, because consistency is proven under pressure. When everything tries to shift focus, that is when alignment must remain strongest. When emotions begin to rise, that is when position must stay steady. When circumstances become unclear, that is when commitment must remain firm. This is where real strength is built, not in ease, but in persistence, not in comfort, but in discipline. And over time, this consistency produces something powerful: automatic stability, a place where alignment no longer requires constant effort because it has become natural, a place where protection no longer needs to be activated in urgency because it is always active, a place where fear no longer interrupts peace because the shield is always in place. This is the goal, not temporary protection, but permanent covering, not occasional alignment, but daily positioning, not reactive defense, but proactive stability. And this can only be achieved through one thing: consistent activation. So make the decision now. Do not delay it. Do not postpone it. Do not treat it as optional, because what is built today determines what stands tomorrow.